Our next speaker has also written quite a bit on Sor Maria de Agreda. Her name is Dr. Miranda Saylor, and she is the Alice and Allen Assistant Curator of American Paintings and Sculpture at the Yale University Art Gallery. She specializes in the art of colonial Latin America with a focus on 17th and 18th century Mexico. Her research explores topics related to female piety. She did an amazing show at the Meadows Museum at SMU, fantastic on that subject. Marian imagery, visions, and translation. Her work has been supported by the Fulbright Program, the John Carter Brown Library, the Tinker Foundation, and the Center for Spain in America, among others. Before arriving at Yale, she completed her PhD at UCLA and worked at the LA County Museum of Art and the Meadows Museum. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Saylor.
I first wanted to echo my colleagues' words of thanks. I wanted to thank Christina and Mark so much for inviting me here. It is such a privilege and an honor to be a part of this incredible group of speakers. It's also just an incredible opportunity to have this really fun reunion of scholars where we all care so deeply about this material and to all celebrate the incredible exhibition that's on view. Lastly, I wanted to thank the Thoma Foundation for making this symposium possible. And following on the heels of Anna's wonderful talk, we are going to take a deeper dive in some of the paintings on view in the exhibition. Okay. Rising above a walled city and flanked by archangels, the Virgin Mary gazes toward heaven, surrounded by radiating sunbeams and turbulent clouds. The Trinity descends from an opening in the sky, and cherubs swoop in from the right of the composition, bearing lilies and roses. These emblems of purity, coupled with Mary's blue and white robes, 12-star crown, and crescent moon, identify her as the Virgin of the Immaculate Conception, the cult dedicated to the belief that Mary, like her son, was conceived without original sin. The picture's lower half expands the subject matter. Etched just beneath the walled city is the inscription, Mística Ciudad de Dios. Beneath the text, two seated figures behold the celestial space above. Accompanied by his eagle, the apostle St. John the Evangelist sits with his quill in hand. Raising her pen toward the sky, the 17th century Spanish abbess and author Sor Maria de Agreda dons blue and white robes, as well as a nun badge, emblazoned with a second Immaculate Conception. Cristobal de Villalpando, one of the most lauded artists in New Spain during the late 17th and early 18th centuries, created this painting in 1706 for the Propaganda Fide de Nuestra Señora de Guadalupe in Zacatecas. He modeled the composition on a 1668 printed frontispiece that accompanied the first edition of Sor Maria's magnum opus, Mystical City of God, which was designed by the Spanish royal court artist Pedro de Villafranca. Villalpando made 3 additional paintings, the Annunciation, Tree of Life, and Holy Family, also currently housed in the Propaganda Fide mission, which has since been converted into the Museo de Guadalupe. Considering the significant differences between iconographies as well as contexts, I will not approach Villalpando's painting as a copy of the printed progenitor by Villafranca, but rather as a work that diverges from prototype to create something new. This paper will examine the pictorial itinerary of Sor Maria as an Immaculist author and probe the question, how did Cristobal de Villalpando take up Sor Maria as a subject and intertwine her theological ideas with canonical iconographies? I will argue Villalpando summoned Sor Maria and her text, inviting viewers to consider the Virgin Mary as an immaculate co-redeemer mediated through Sor Maria's visions. Given the painting's location within the missionary college of Nuestra Señora de Guadalupe, it is likely such themes of redemption would have resonated with the missionaries in training who would have identified their own work with both the Virgin's and Sor Maria's. Since we just learned about Sor Maria's biography and presence in Mexico with Anna's wonderful talk, I want to jump straight into providing some historical context on Sor Maria's devotion to the Virgin Mary, and specifically the Immaculate Conception. Even before the first edition of Mystical City of God was published, she was known as an advocate of the Marian cult. The scholar Emilia Pardo Bazan, for example, highlights correspondence between Sor Maria and the Spanish king Philip IV, in which the nun reminded the monarch of the Virgin's significance in Spain. She wrote, "We must believe in the Queen of Heaven as the intercessor, mediatrix, advocate, and restorer of this monarchy. I hope that you will be very powerful above all else in order to assure the definition of the mystery of the conception of the Queen of Heaven." So in this letter, Sor Maria uses the opportunity to advance the argument that the Virgin of the Immaculate Conception should be declared dogma. Sor Maria also portrays the Virgin Mary as an omniscient visionary in her divinely inspired biography, Mystical City of God. According to Sor Maria, the Virgin comprehended and contained more treasures than in all the rest of things joined together. In chapter 8 of the first volume, Sor Maria cites St. John the Evangelist's book of Revelation, where he describes the Virgin of the Apocalypse as, quote, when he describes it as, quote, "A great sign appeared in heaven, a woman covered with the sun and under her feet the moon, and a crown of 12 stars on her head." Adding her own perspective, she writes, "The mysteries enclosed in this wall and doors of this mystical city of Blessed Mary are so hidden and grand that with difficulty, I, an ignorant woman, take time to reduce to words what I have been given to understand." Lastly, Anna Nogar has highlighted how Sor Maria justifies her own telling events when she writes, "It is now time that human understanding straightens up and stretches in honor of our great Queen, and also that whoever was opposed shrink back and halt in dispossessing her divine conception. For this reason, it has been necessary to address this mystery so many times." Here, Sor Maria insists that writing on the Immaculate Conception in the 17th century was necessary to convince those who were still in doubt. Mystical City of God's defense of the Immaculate Conception, along with Villafranca's engraving of Sor Maria, made their passage across the Atlantic starting in the late 17th century. Most editions that included frontispieces featured portraits of Sor Maria as a cloistered and private abbess seated in her study or surrounded by a frame. Although Mexican viewers were more accustomed to beholding European prints depicting Sor Maria in isolation as an author, Mexican painters appear keen to transform Sor Maria and her environs from a private study to a more sociable sphere. Works such as the one by Villalpando and from the Museo de Arte Religioso ex Convento de Santa Mónica in Puebla, which is also on view, they both reveal a direct link with Villafranca's iconographic antecedent. Additional paintings in the Propaganda Fide de San Fernando in Mexico City and the Ex Convento de San Francisco in Pachuca feature her with other Franciscans who gather in support of the Immaculate Conception. Still others portray her as a branch of a genealogical tree representing the Franciscan order, gathering around the Immaculate Conception, or as part of a procession parading in front of this Marian devotion. Significantly, Mexican painters render Sor Maria as a figure amongst a larger assembly of mostly male bodies who populate the lower register of the picture underneath the airborne Immaculate Conception. No longer strictly the author of her writings about and speaking for the Virgin, Sor Maria became a central proponent of the Immaculate Conception, which bolstered devotion to the Virgin. So now that we've reviewed Sor Maria's introduction to the Virgin Mary in Mystical City of God and traced the circulation of her likeness in painting, we can return to Zacatecas, where these paintings are normally on view and they're not on loan here for this exhibition. In spite of the lack of archival records related to the commission of Villalpando's paintings, there is ample documentation revealing the Propaganda Fide's support for Sor Maria's theology in the city. Franciscans traveled from Querétaro to Zacatecas in 1686. In 1703, they opened a hospice in the nearby town of Guadalupe, which would eventually serve as the original site of the college. The following year, the Spanish monarchy issued a royal cedula granting permission to formally establish the new apostolic college as a strategic location for the Propaganda Fide's continued mission to convert indigenous populations in the north of New Spain. Once in operation, the college trained mostly Creole novices and friars who came from other Franciscan houses in Mexico. Multiple copies of Sor Maria's publications are still housed in the Colegio de Guadalupe's library and evidence her popularity as an author and missionary. Upon reviewing the library's holdings, I located 9 different editions of Sor Maria's writings and biographies. And lastly, the facade of the Missions Church, which was built in 1721, testifies to the magnitude of Sor Maria's presence at the college. Sculpted in relief, she appears just above the front entryway with a quill in hand, standing next to Duns Scotus and opposite the apostles Luke and John. So based on these sources, it is likely that Villalpando's paintings were commissioned as one of the earliest series to be housed in the missionary college. Neither patronage documents nor records detailing how it was originally displayed have been uncovered. However, scholars Francisco de la Maza and Juana Gutierrez Aces argue that the paintings were likely made for a retablo in the colegio. Given the Propaganda Fide's long-standing support of Sor Maria that emerged in the 17th century, it is no surprise that the college would commission works illustrating the nun's likeness and her theological ideas. As mentioned in the introduction, Villalpando drew inspiration from the 1668 printed frontispiece when painting Misticacidad de Dios. Villalpando adhered to the same vertical tripartite scheme divided between a celestial sphere, middle terrain, and ground. And yet, despite Villalpando's observance of Villafranca's precedent, he, to a greater degree, I will argue, elevates both the Virgin Mary and Sor Maria. So let's first turn to Mary. Villalpando cleaves the heavenly city from her body, lowering the architecture to the middle of the composition and raising Mary to congregate with angels bearing lilies, roses, and a spotless mirror. Additionally, Villalpando added the archangels Gabriel and Michael, as well as the Trinity. Villalpando potentially included these holy figures as a way of re-envisioning Sor Maria's text when she designates Michael and Gabriel as, quote, the ambassadors of the human word and of the most holy Mother Mary. Villalpando further diverges from Villafranca's printed model by depicting a winged Mary surrounded by God and Christ. Perhaps Villalpando chose to keep the Virgin's wings as a method of demonstrating the painting's close relationship with St. John and Sor Maria's revelations, which both describe the, quote, woman with 2 wings of a great eagle. Meanwhile, aligning her with the Trinity also appears to respond to Sor Maria's extended discussion of the Immaculate Conception. Book 1 notes, quote, in the first instant of Mary's conception, the entire Trinity renewed the old decrees to raise her and magnify her, and just as she cooperated with the Passion and gave her Son to be the father of the human lineage, so the Lord himself made her a participant in the dignity of Redeemer. Therefore, Villalpando adjusts the iconography by presenting the Virgin's body in flight and emphasizing her kinship with God and Christ. So shifting our attention to the bottom half of the composition, we also observe how Villalpando altered the print's earthly figures. In the lower left corner, Villalpando replaces the medieval Franciscan Duns Scotus with St. John the Evangelist. So imagine Villalpando taking a look at the print and saying, I'm going to make some modifications. Let's see. Sounds good. Modifying St. John's placement to cohabit and he also drops the mystical city to the center of the composition. Modifying St. John's placement to cohabit the ground register with Sor Maria, coupled with their parallel postures and expressions, radically levels the relationship between the apostle and the 17th century mystic. Perhaps Villalpando pictures Sor Maria as an equal counterpart, as a way of referencing her own self-described close relationship to St. John's Book of Revelation. But upon closer viewing, Villalpando takes one step further in elevating Sor Maria's preeminence. He positions Sor Maria's finger grazing the gate and her quill extending upward and brushing the celestial clouds. Modeled in this posture, she is the only one to come into contact with New Jerusalem and link the Virgin's space with that of the authors. Seemingly raising her quill after just having signed the painting with its title, Sor Maria's gesture intensifies her link with the text. Notably, the title written on a horizontal line running across the canvas is Sor Maria's magnum opus, not the Book of Revelation. Thus, it is Sor Maria's writing that is overtly displayed as a kind of description of the work, defining the painting's subject as one that is of the female author's creation. Villalpando's inscription therefore deepens the union between the Immaculate Conception, Sor Maria, and her magnum opus. She is no longer a part of an assembly of Immaculist authors like the painting or the print we previously viewed, but instead the extraordinary intercessor who imparts divine wisdom to her readers and viewers. Although Villalpando's Mystical City of God is not a frontispiece like the original engraving by Villafranca, the Propaganda Fide's library holdings in Zacatecas indicate that the friars would have been aware of the relationship between the print and painting. Thus, it could be argued that just as Villafranca's frontispiece operated as a device that framed Sor Maria's text, Villalpando's painting could have functioned similarly. As such, this work offers the viewer the opportunity to consider the other three paintings through the lens of Sor Maria and her ideas. While each work depicts seemingly disparate subjects, I will argue Villalpando ingeniously weaves together Sor Maria's exalted descriptions of the Virgin Mary with pictorial elements connected to the Immaculate Conception as a way of presenting her as a player central to humanity's redemption. Shifting our attention first to the representation of the Annunciation, we immediately identify how unusual this painting is. Francisco de la Maza was the first to link this anomalous painting with Mystical City of God. Citing chapter 10 of book 2, he quotes from Sor Maria's description of Gabriel, who, quote, descended from heaven supreme, accompanied by many thousands of beautiful angels who followed him in a visible way. In contrast to traditional Annunciations, which situate the scene in a domestic space, such as this other Annunciation painting by Villalpando, this version that we're looking at today from Zacatecas presents an amphitheater of celestial witnesses. According to Sor Maria, the thousands of angels not only appear in this episode of Mary's biography, but are a standard fixture throughout Mystical City of God. Sor Maria first introduces them in the chapter that follows Gabriel announcing Anne's pregnancy and preceding the Immaculate Conception. In Book 1, Chapter 14, God appoints hundreds of angels to act as guardians to the Virgin Mary. By repeating the notion that thousands of angels not only present the moment of her conception, but also at the Annunciation, Sor Maria links the two events. Notably, when the Holy Office condemned Mystical City of God in 1681, they singled out the, quote, multitude of angels placed at the service of Mary as one of Sor Maria's doctrines that was, quote, worthy of repair. Therefore, Villalpando's decision to transform the Annunciation this way was a blatant example of the artist gravitating towards Sor Maria's unorthodoxies. While the remaining two paintings do not appear to be inspired by specific pages within Mystical City of God, they also underline the Virgin Mary's immaculacy as consequential to her role. Turning first to the Tree of Life, we see Adam and Eve in an unusual setting. Typically, the pair is situated within the Garden of Eden or amidst their expulsion. But in this 1706 painting, the two figures flank a large wooden cross covered in grapes and topped with a crown of thorns evoking the Eucharist. Villalpando uses the cross's unusual vines as a way of upholding the Virgin Mary as a central player in Adam and Eve's penitence. 2 ovular medallions decorate the cross, one featuring the crucifixion and the other the Virgin Mary. Strikingly, the Virgin stands atop a crescent moon and is crowned by a halo, while the sun peeks its head out from behind her body. Thus, Mary, in the guise of the Immaculate Conception, is equated with the scene of the crucifixion, linking the 2 iconographies for their shared evocations of redemption. And lastly, the Holy Family illustrates Mary's parents, Anne and Joachim, the Virgin, Joseph, and Christ enthroned. A small rendering of the tree of Jesse is carved in relief within the steps and evokes the lineage of kings from which Jesus descends. Villalpando appears attentive to genealogy here. In comparison to traditional renderings of the tree of Jesse, which culminate with Christ and the Virgin, Villalpando creates 2 separate family trees, distinguishing these larger 5 figures from the royal lineage as exceptional. Anne and Joachim are featured in the lower corners of the composition in the same manner as many Immaculate Conception paintings that present the Virgin Mary blossoming from a flower that stems from her parents. By insisting that the Holy Family starts with Anne and Joachim, Villalpando once again reminds the viewer of not only Christ's immaculacy, but his mother's as well. So in conclusion, by building on the myriad editions of Mystical City of God traversing the Viceroyalty, Villalpando creates a new network of connections that gives form to a magnified Virgin Mary and Sor Maria. Villalpando's painting of the Immaculate Conception picks up Sor Maria's vaunted Virgin Mary, surrounded by the Trinity, angels, and Mystical City. But by foregrounding Sor Maria with St. John, Villalpando uniquely elevates her status to that of an apostle. Furthermore, examining these works together places the pictorial elements, ideas, and figures and allows us to pay attention to what emerges in between. Villalpando intermingles passages from Mystical City of God with iconographic elements associated with the Immaculate Conception as a method of upholding the Virgin Mary as a central player in human salvation, per Sor Maria's argument. Thank you.
Thank you, Miranda. That was fantastic. Questions from the audience?
Thank you, Miranda. I love this slide. Wow, I don't think I've seen these. I'm familiar with them individually, but seeing them together and imagining them in a retablo, that must have been really spectacular. I'm also drawn to the second image from the left with Agreda there sitting, and she looks like a Mexican nun, doesn't she?
Absolutely.
She's Mexicanizer because she doesn't have the little Spanish venera. She's got the big
That's an escudo.
escudo,
Yeah.
the monca, which is Mexican, and the image on the escudo mimics the scene, the vision that she's seeing above. It's a little image of the Immaculate Conception. So it's sort of a Mexicanization, which is that's a wonderful thing. But it's very nuanced. I think another way that the Immaculate Conception, or a version of it, is Mexicanizes through the Virgin of Guadalupe. Mm-hmm. And I also think about portraits of crowned nuns, of conceptionists, just like Sor Maria was a conceptionist.
Yeah.
With the escudo, some of them have the Immaculate Conception, like she's wearing, but some of them have images of the Virgin of Guadalupe. And I'm wondering, and maybe this is also a question for Ana, Guadalupe becomes the patroness of New Spain and then of the Americas in the 18th century, and because she is a version of the Virgin, the Immaculate Conception, I wonder I've never thought about this, but this painting is making me think of it. I wonder, what does that do for the writings of Agreda, of Mother, the Mother of Agreda, in terms of her promotion of the Immaculate Conception to move that to dogma, because it's the Pope, right, that authorizes the image of Guadalupe as as the patroness of the Americas. Can you see where I'm going?
I do. I'm quickly ruminating on it in my head, and I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to come up with a nuanced answer on the spot.
I just wonder, I don't have an answer, I'm not expecting you to say anything, has anybody thought about that?
You know, it's the image that you showed of Guadalupe, Zacatecas, of that keystone at the entry. I mean, that is Guadalupe that they're flanking.
Exactly.
You know, not the Immaculate Conception as we see her traditionally in, Villalpando, but it's Guadalupe. That the St. Luke is painting, that Duns Scotus is gazing at, that, Sor Maria de Agreda is writing about. So there's a conflation.
I was going to say, initially I was thinking, maybe, because I've always thought about the Virgin of Guadalupe receiving so much attention that the part of the motivation of my studies is to, look at these other instances in which the Virgin Mary is being represented in Mexican religious art that isn't necessarily associated with that devotion, but rather than thinking of this as like a mutually exclusive thing where one's in competition with the other, I think your idea of the conflation is actually really spot on, because they all are kind of coming together and in support of one another. I don't think that they're necessarily opposed at all.
Cesar, you sit in the most difficult of places.
I just want to contribute to the conversation here. I think you stated the obvious, that the Virgen de Guadalupe is an immaculate image, but isn't this just an issue of personal devotion? I think the issue is that the Virgin is immaculate. Mm-hmm. Whether she's depicted as Our Lady of Mount Carmel, Our Lady of the Mercedarians, Our Lady of Guadalupe, I think is the point of the devotional literature on the Immaculate Conception, whether Agreda writes it or other writers, I think. That's just my opinion.
May I just interject? I'm coming from the point of view of art history, where there is a very specific iconography that's associated with the Immaculate Conception that's distinct from Our Lady of Mount Carmel or Our Lady of Mercy or so forth. But that's just my own disciplinary bias, maybe.
Yeah, you took the words out of my mouth. I want to stress the same, that the Virgin of Carmel or the Virgin of the Rosary, they're not stressing Immaculate doctrine. You may be a believer and think that it is dogma without it being dogma, and read every virgin as that. But in the colonial world, they were not an icon of Immaculate doctrine by any means. I don't know if you would agree.
No, I completely agree. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your presentation, Miranda. I loved it. I especially appreciated your really careful and close reading of the second panel from the left. The idea of Maria de Agreda as like a direct intercessor, somebody who's on the level or maybe more even directly connected than St. John the Evangelist in mediating this connection to the divine is amazing. And I'm wondering what the next step is. Are you going to continue looking more inside Villalpando? Are you looking, what's the next step?
I would say the next step is really thinking about what the connection between Sor Maria's likeness, but also her theological ideas, what that connection is with religious art in Mexico during the 18th century in general. So my larger research interests actually take a deeper dive into methods that are a bit more similar to how I approach the Annunciation in terms of thinking about the relationship between mystical city of God and how artists use it not as this prescriptive text that dictates how religious art should be depicted, but actually uses it instead as a really useful source of creativity and inspiration to then go off and create these novel ways of representing the Virgin Mary in particular. When you talked about St. Joseph, though, it did make me think, I have to go look into other paintings beyond the representation of the Virgin Mary and think about how artists may have gravitated towards passages related to other figures as well. So I think in some, the bigger question is thinking about, where is there kind of, how does Sor Maria's text serve as this source, really rich source of inspiration, of theological material for artists in Mexico, and how are they intertwining those ideas with other pictorial elements, with other artistic traditions, to create something that we haven't necessarily seen before?